there is a force within every single person that is for growth and healing. And you can just call it your essence. Some people call it Buddha nature. Some Christians call it Christ nature or your soul. It's that you that existed from the moment there was you, and it will be there until the moment you die.
MindHack is a podcast about the psychology of performance, behavior change, and self-optimization. Each episode explores how to think better, work smarter, and live more intentionally through conversations with top thinkers, entrepreneurs, and scientists.
Hello, and welcome to the MindHack podcast, the show where we explore the science of peak performance, mindset, and personal growth. I'm your host, Cody McLean, and today I'm joined by Colleen West, a licensed marriage and family therapist with over 25 years of experience in helping individuals heal from both simple and complex trauma. Colleen is an approved consultant for internal family systems therapy and the author of We All Have Parts, an illustrated guide to healing trauma with internal family systems. She's helped countless individuals understand that we all have different parts of ourselves, protective mechanisms that are developed to keep us safe, but sometimes they also keep us stuck. In this episode, we're going to explore how trauma lives in our bodies and minds, and more importantly, how we can heal by developing a compassionate relationship with our internal parts. We'll hear Colleen's insights on 3 types of parts we all have: managers, firefighters, and exiles. And she'll share techniques you can use to access your own self-energy, that calm, curious, compassionate core that exists within all of us. By the end of our conversation, you'll have concrete tools to better understand your triggers, manage emotional overwhelm, and begin your own healing journey. Whether you're dealing with past trauma, struggling with self-criticism, or simply want to understand yourself better, this episode is packed with wisdom to help you transform your inner world. Let's dive in. Colleen, welcome to the show.
Thanks, Cody, and happy to be here. And that's a lot. I hope we can cover all that in this interview because it's my favorite topic, I have to say.
Well, you've been helping people heal trauma for over 2 decades. So I'm curious kind of what inspired you to specialize in trauma therapy and in particular to use internal family systems.
Yeah. Well, it kind of found me. I grew up in a family, an alcoholic home, lots of rage, violence. It was not the worst, but it was a pretty tough way to grow up. And I was was one of 7 girls, and it was a pretty chaotic atmosphere in a lot of ways. And for whatever reason, I don't know, my temperament, or maybe it was my soul's journey, but I ended up being the family therapist. And I knew that I was needed as that from a very early age. And of course, that comes with a whole lot of, it was a drive for me to learn how to listen to people and help people and connect with people, and to feel useful and to attune to other people. But it also came with very heavy burdens that I felt that, I went into adulthood feeling kind of like I had never had a childhood, and that I just went right into the work world like at age 2. And so fast forward, I ended up becoming a psychotherapist, a marriage and family therapist. And it really was a terrific match for me because I have ADHD, and I could sit all day long with people in my office and never be bored, be completely engaged in every single hour. And because every story is different. And whereas if I was working in an office, I just wanted to just run out of the room screaming because I was so bored with the same old. So anyway, I become a psychotherapist, and EMDR was a fairly new thing. And I thought, this is a really effective therapy. I'm going to learn it. And I did, became good at it. I became a consultant, then I became a trainer. And what I loved about it was that it could transform a person's memories into something new, something healthier, something that was resolved. But it also introduced me to the whole world of severe trauma, because when you are trained in EMDR, people come to see you with that. It's like you get the trauma label. She treats trauma. But trauma is so vast, and it's a word that's very overused now too. But I began to get clients who had such long-standing abuse and neglect that EMDR couldn't really even touch their trauma. EMDR works beautifully for people who have some inner resources, but it can be a long, slow process to get to EMDR if they don't have those. So then enter internal family systems, because I knew I needed something more, some more skills. And once I learned internal family systems, I became so convinced that that was the way the mind was put together. And EMDR, turns out, actually is a parts model too, but it's not recognized as such. So memories are stored in parts of us. And but IFS is a very direct way to engage with our internal parts. That was a really long talk, long monologue there.
No, it's fun. And for those who aren't familiar with EMDR and internal family systems, can you tell us what they are?
Sure. EMDR is quite well known now. Many people seek it out. It was kind of discovered that when memories are stored in the brain in a certain form, and that stimulating eye movements, and then we found out that alternating tones work, and taps on alternating sides of the body can work, but those things can unlock the way a memory is stored in the brain and restore it in a healthier form in the present day. So a memory can be stuck like you have a traumatic car accident, and it can affect, your feelings of safety driving, and it can just get bigger and bigger and bigger too. Like many traumas just sort of snowball because we want to avoid getting those fears stimulated again. And so in a sense, a memory, if you've ever had one of those big T traumas, like, combat trauma or a rape or an assault, they can stay frozen in your memory forever in a very, sort of crystalline form. They don't have access to subsequent learning. And EMDR unlocked those memories by using eye movements or alternate taps. IFS is very different, but the interesting thing is that it is also a transformative therapy. So, and I can say more about what that is, but IFS was invented by Richard Schwartz. He's a great mentor of mine, and I really admire his work. And what he discovered was that his clients had distinct little personalities within themselves, sub-personalities, and they had different sometimes different genders, different experiences, different beliefs, different body sensations. And the main thing he discovered was that this is perfectly normal. It has nothing to do with, being a multiple personality or something of that nature. Everybody has parts. Yeah. So IFS is kind of a very systematic way to meet and get to know your internal parts, see the way they relate to each other, and understand the difficult memories and beliefs that they're carrying, and then help them let them go, help them release them. So.
And I guess on a personal note, so, for those who are listening, if you're not aware, I grew up in foster care and I lost my parents when I was young. And so I went through a lot of trauma growing up in a scenario like that. And many years ago, I did EMDR therapy where it had the light that was going left and right. And as I understood it at the time, is like that we're bringing up that emotion because often those experiences kind of get coded in our unconscious. And so the goal is to first create like a safe space that you can always revert to in case, it gets too overwhelming for you. But then it's to bring up all the experiences, the emotions, what it felt like, bring yourself back to that place and then to recode it with kind of like a neutral experience, which I guess is like the light or the tapping that's going left and right. And so the idea is to remove that kind of unconscious trigger that is affecting our current day-to-day life. And I did that when I was trying to go back. I think I had this attachment to feeling like I could have done more to take care of my mom to prevent her from becoming an alcoholic and going down this spiral and trying to always like look up for the family. And in some ways it helped me to accept, what happened and I was just a child and, nobody can put that kind of expectation on you. And so is to let that kind of unconscious guilt go in a way. And we did that in kind of concert where I was introduced to internal family systems. And it was really groundbreaking at the time. And as I was talking to you before the podcast, I think really IFS is in some ways I think it's a huge portion of the future of psychotherapy, in that it allows us to look at I think the most important part that we're kind of lacking right now is this inattention to our own emotions, where we don't realize if you pull out your phone, sometimes you pull out your phone in the checkout line because you're bored, and we don't realize like that boredom, it's an emotion. And often we experience these emotions throughout the day, but we don't know that we're experiencing a negative emotion, but we just default to numbing ourselves, where it's looking at our phone, scrolling on doom scrolling, right? Or taking a drug. And when we do that consistently, we are kind of drowning out our internal system. We're skewing ourselves. And internal family systems, I think first it teaches us to recognize that we're having that negative emotion, and then to look at what part of ourself is trying to bring this up. And you can correct me if I'm going off on a tangent here. Is that if we end up having something? What's a good example? Do you have any good examples? That I'll let you take the mic here.
I love where you're going with this, actually. I think that, people numb in so many different ways now. And, I myself, I have the impulse to, go on social media when I'm just sort of tired at the end of the day, or there's so many ways we do this. Food, substances. And if we get caught up in constantly numbing or checking out, our growth really does stop. That's a fact we know in alcohol and drug treatment. Very often if a person starts using heavily at 13, they really don't mature very much past that point. And in a way, we're all in that fishbowl experiment with smartphones. It's one of my soapboxes. I think it's really changing our minds, right? Because everything's so ready to hand. Even many times it's like I look at my phone to check the weather, and then I get caught up in a work email at like 6:30 a.m. It's like, no, this is not good. right?
Mm-hmm.
So I like where you're going with this. And I think that globally, as we numb more as a society, and certainly when kids see their parents with phones constantly, when babies see when you give a baby a phone to distract them in the grocery store, these are going to have big implications in people's capacity to look inside themselves. Because when you look inside, that's what your real feelings are, what cause you to grow and progress and relate.
And so kind of looking at internal family systems, I know in my experience, it was to break down, it kind of has this core ideology, I believe, that it looks at kind of our behavior in having a positive intent. So I'm curious, kind of how does this mindset shape kind of how you approach clients' problems? Like, do you have an example of kind of reframing a kind of a so-called like bad behavior as like a protector or something positive?
Oh, totally. I think that's core to IFS. It's one of the reasons why so many therapists just find like such resonance with it, because we're not making anybody bad or wrong. Of course there are bad behaviors, but there are evil behaviors even. But what we see is if you get down to the core of any part, they are trying to solve a problem for the client. So, a severe eating disorder or severe alcoholism or drug use, those parts feel absolutely desperate for relief from the suffering that is underneath. And so they're trying to solve a problem. So they may also, some addictions, some compulsive behaviors are a response to just an overwhelming critical voice inside, right? And so they're trying to get the person out of pain in that way, right? So yeah, all parts have a positive intent for the client, even if some of the behaviors have unfortunate consequences. If I drink 2 glasses of wine every night, I'm going to have negative consequences from that. My growth will slow down, even apart from physical things about that, right?
No. And I think some of the parts that I've mapped out in the past is I go back to the Cody that was very young on the school bus. I had been creating my first business, and really kind of as I got into adulthood, I would burn out. And I was always like, so much of my self-worth was based on my output and how productive, how successful could I be? And going back to and trying to ask, where is that coming from? And I think it kind of comes from this younger version of myself that was kind of like the weird kid in school that didn't have any friends, that was trying to feel validated or trying to gain acceptance from others. And I saw if I could build a business and be really successful, that other people will admire me and see me as somebody to associate themselves with. And I kind of saw that was partly at the root of this behavior that was causing me to just be like a workaholic to an extreme. And being able to then recognize that this is a part of me. It's they're trying to protect me. It's they're trying to do a good thing. It's trying to help me feel validated, feeling part of a tribe, which is an innate human behavior. And yet it was hurting me, right? And I think by recognizing this part and like I would go back and kind of visualize myself like in my basement where I would be working as a kid, and I would visualize like these different younger parts of me that, other associated issues, and having a conversation with it like in my head, and then asking, kind of going back and forth about what it would say, and then imagining my older self like hugging my younger self and telling you that, it's okay. I love you. Like you are, you're trying to do good for me. And in some ways it felt like this relief I had felt like a certain level of relief. And I wouldn't say it outright kind of solved this need to be successful or that validation, but I think it lowered it, it lowered it just a tad.
Yeah. 100%. I think what you're describing is a classic manager-driven system. So you've got amazing managers, Cody, just amazingly functional, high-functioning managers. I do too. And they've really gotten us far. But they can dominate a personality too. And to the extent they dominate, there are exiles underneath, the young, vulnerable parts of ourselves that are causing us pain. And those managers, they are trying to keep that pain out of awareness. And so, whether it's lack of belonging or lack of importance or, all the ways we feel less than, especially when we lose attachment figures early or when we are, we look weird or we sound weird. Of course, weird is in quotes. But those, it's a relationship. And so if we can heal those vulnerable parts, the exiles of our personality, the parts that our families or caregivers couldn't acknowledge were there, maybe they couldn't acknowledge them in themselves, then our managers can just be the rock stars that they are. Everybody needs managers to run their lives, to get up and, eat good food and to go out and exercise. We all need managers. There's no way to escape that. But what we want is a system in balance. So what in IFS, the goal is self-leadership, so that there's a conversation between your parts and your core kind of wise self, what we call self, capital S. Yeah.
And so many of us have, I think I don't know if there's a misconception that some people may assume that you have to have a very specific type of trauma or that you have to have trauma that you can revert to and look back to that you've had that would be the impetus for you using something like internal family systems. But yet many of us have an inner critic or a childlike side. And so I'm wondering, is that true, or could everybody benefit by IFS? And if they could, how should they start kind of mapping out their own parts?
Mm-hmm. So my understanding is that you cannot be human and not pick up burdens as you grow up, right? No human life is just seamlessly lovely. Even the best, healthiest, most resourced families still will have illness, deaths, losses, separations. Even if you don't have all of that as a kid, you still might go to school and be bullied for God knows what reason, right? Or a teacher takes a dislike to you, and then you pick up what we call in IFS burdens. And those are the heavy, negative beliefs about yourself, the feelings, body sensations that go along with feeling lonely, ashamed, less than, afraid, all of those emotions, all of those states. And so every human being has burdens. If you happen to be minority of any kind, gay, trans, a person of color, you're going to have heavier burdens because our society doesn't necessarily acknowledge you as being as good as other people. That creates burdens. Being a foster care kid, same thing, right? There are so many ways that we can interact with the world and pick up burdens. But if you have trauma, that's what I call big T trauma, like, parents who are drug addicts. I mean, there's so many, everybody knows the list. Displacement, being sexually abused, all those things, those create very heavy burdens in your system. And they can take a lot more time unpacking them. Now, I think you mentioned, how do we work with this on our own? So is that where you're headed? Feel free to redirect me anytime.
Yeah, well, I know that IFS is commonly worked in with a therapist. And so I suppose I'll map it out in two questions. Is that, say, how would somebody know whether they should consider seeking out a therapist to work inside internal family systems? And how might they start if they want to try like a little mini session? Or maybe you could walk us through kind of like a little coaching session in terms of how might they start, just to kind of, put their feet in the water and see what it's like.
Yeah. Well, if you can just look up, there are so many great IFS workbooks now, and they can take you through getting to know your parts. So, and then working with them. So there's just a number of them that are really great. I won't single one out, but Richard Schwartz did publish one last year. So you can do self-study that way. If you can afford therapy, there are wonderful IFS therapists now, and they will take you they'll accompany you into your own system. But the way to start is really to slow down and start to read your body sensations. And I carried enough trauma that I couldn't do it myself. I needed a guide. If you have a lot of attachment trauma early on, that is in the preverbal period, which is my specialty, then it can be really scary to try to wade into your preverbal parts. They may not even talk. They may give you a whole lot of body sensations and feelings, but very few words. And also they can feel like they just don't know how to do this on their own, so they'll probably require a guide. And so I needed that. And still I have exiles that I need help working with. But you can do a ton of self-study, and I think these workbooks are great. So my book, We All Have Parts, is a great introduction to internal family systems therapy. It just gives you the basics, gives you some basics about trauma and burdens and all the terms that we use.
So I would love for you to describe the three parts, but then also, how are the three parts different than the self? And kind of, why is it important to kind of access this core self along with these parts?
Yeah. Well, so in IFS, there are just three different kinds of parts. There are managers that I referred to, the ones that run our lives. They're proactive. They have agendas. They manage time and all those kinds of things. They get us through school, all those things. There are firefighters that are the parts of us that are associated with addiction or numbing of any kind, compulsions, compulsive behaviors. Those are the parts that are trying to get us out of pain in different ways, trying to soothe or comfort sometimes. And then there are exiles. And so managers and firefighters are what we call protectors. And then there are exiles that are the parts of us that are the ones that just hold the vulnerable feelings. And those are the feelings, body sensations, and beliefs that were so painful that that we need to push them out of awareness. They get exiled as kids. If you were a super vulnerable kid who was in an unsafe environment, then acting vulnerable might not have been acceptable at all. And so you had to push down, exile those vulnerable feelings, and your protectors took over. Some people, especially with severe trauma, have addictive processes, addictions of all kinds. Those are the firefighters. Some people have their managers take over and they just get really busy. I was much more that type. I wasn't super addictive. But all people have some of both. And it's just a matter of sort of who dominates in your system. I was a really good girl. And so I never went too far into the firefighters, but my managers were super highly developed. And there's a lot of it. If your system is dominated by managers, then you can really like a lot of control, and you can get burned out, and you can have headaches, and you can have also, just this kind of the sense of overwhelm and exhaustion a lot. If your system's dominated by firefighters, and we all know people like this, they just go from kind of one mini addiction to another. So, it's a little bit of being on your phone in the morning, and then it's food, and then it's alcohol or weed at night, or TV or movies or gaming. It's just like a little bit of addictions all day long, every day. And they are often dominate. They often feel like their life doesn't get started, or they feel stuck in their life. The ones that are manager driven are zooming ahead, but they don't have that much fun, and they can really be vulnerable to burnout. Firefighters, the systems that are dominated by firefighters can be, feel like I just never and can catch a break. I can't get ahead. I can't, right? And the ones that are dominated by exiles, there are also systems like that, are fearful, worried, sad a lot. So there's a lot of those vulnerable feelings that are perking up, poking up their heads all the time. So, yeah, does that answer your question?
Yeah. And then what's the role of the self in all this? So if we're able to, is the important part to map out the parts of ourselves? And then are we labeling these as manager, firefighter, or exile? Or how does that work?
So first, to talk about the role of the self, there is a force within every single person that is for growth and healing. And you can just call it your essence. Some people call it Buddha nature. Some Christians call it Christ nature, or your soul. It's that you that existed from the moment there was you, and it will be there until the moment you die. And it's that little spark inside you that is unlike anyone else's. It's everybody knows they have it in their best moments. But also most of us have parts that are kind of eclipsing that self most of the day, most of every day. And the goal of IFS is to get to know, have a working appreciation of all of our parts and the roles their positive intent for us, so that we can be more in self more often. So, Cody, tell me, what's a time in your life when you just felt completely in self energy? kind of open-hearted, present, alive.
That's tough.
It doesn't have to be absolute either, just more of that.
I suppose probably like the first time I traveled outside America, I went to Guatemala by myself, and I didn't speak any Spanish. I was alone. I wasn't with a travel group. I just arranged this trip on my own. And I was at Lake Atitlan, which is just this beautiful area, and stayed on this really nice little hotel on the lake. And I was by myself, and there was like a stark difference where I typically would never travel by myself. And I think to do that, and then along the nature, I did parasailing, something I was scared to do. I went walking in the villages, and I was able to take some really amazing photographs. And I kind of, in some ways, I went on that trip to see, could I be a photographer? Can I have that sort of eye? And I was really amazed with the output. And I think that was one of those times where just being there, I was so enamored in this realization of, wow, I did it. I kind of overcame so many obstacles that, it seems, I don't know how many people necessarily travel by themselves, but I think everybody needs to do it at least once in their life, right? And I was very proud of myself and the experience of that trip.
Yeah. So it sounds like you grew in self-love doing that. There's some way that you felt this greater appreciation for yourself. Your managers got you there, sounds like, right? It took a lot of courage to get yourself there. But then you were clearly in nature, in another culture, outside your normal culture. I actually love how travel does that for many of us. It brings us into curiosity, such strong curiosity and calm. Right there, these qualities of self, curiosity, calm, creativity, connection. There's a few others too. And travel can do that because we are not being driven by our typical managers, right? The doers. Although some people go on vacation and then their firefighters take over and they just get drunk, for 2 weeks. But I do think that beginner's mind place that you describe sounds like it had a lot of self energy, right? Some people find it when they're sitting with their grandchildren, for example, where the thing about self is that it has no agenda. And all of our other parts have agendas. So, that, and by the way, let's not denigrate firefighters. I don't denigrate managers. I don't denigrate firefighters either. They are positive impulses for relaxation, fun, all of it, right? And so, there's nothing wrong with my firefighters saying, hey, let's just make a great meal and go eat it outside today. Everybody needs the sweetness in life too, right? It's just when they get really extreme that they can cause problems, and same way with managers. So what we're looking for is balance and a system where our self can lead more. So self is full of compassion and full, just like what you visited a moment earlier in your system. Self is full of care and full of just that kind of natural curiosity, natural calm. Self is not tense. When you describe being in Guatemala, you had that kind of calm, like there wasn't a drive there to be any certain way.
And so in some ways, is the self just this this all-knowing like part of our soul. And I'm reminded of this book, and it's just on the tip of my tongue. One that I read a very long time ago that was informative to so many people, that you have the thinking part, and then you have like this other part of you. And the whole premise is that we are not our thoughts. And too often we identify with our thoughts, but there is a part of ourself that doesn't think, but it's there. And that's truly like the actual part of ourselves.
Yeah. Although self is not a part. So self is the only thing inside that is not a part. So we have to watch our language a little bit. But it's, to me, the way I experience is it's the essence of me that's underneath everything else. That's underneath the voices, underneath the agendas, and yet it is a force for good. Everybody's got it, everybody's got it. Even the most abused or traumatized, highly traumatized person has this underneath, and can access it through good IFS therapy. Can take a while for protectors to get safe enough to soften back. But
so I'd love to kind of move on, and something that you previously mentioned about the really early stuff. So like pre-verbal trauma. And so as I understand, this is kind of trauma that happened before we had words or kind of clear memories. So I'm curious, kind of how can something that we don't consciously remember still affect us in adulthood, and kind of like what are some of the signs or struggles that might hint that a person has undergone this kind of trauma as like an infant or in the womb?
Yeah. Well, pre-verbal trauma, and you can also often, it's called attachment trauma because it's in this early period of time in a baby's life. It's the stuff that creates the templates, the sort of implicit templates that run our lives for the rest of our lives. So it's how much can I trust other people? Do I look to people as a source of nurturance, or are they scary? Do I have to be alone to feel safe? Do I believe I'm of value whether I'm producing something or not? All those implicit, deep beliefs are laid down in the pre-verbal period by your caregivers. And I don't know when you lost your parents, but I can feel when I have a client, I can feel if they were well nurtured for the first year of life, and then for some horrible reason they lost their parents, they will carry some scars from that. But I can still feel that they have a kind of well to draw from of self-compassion, basically. Self-love and self-compassion. Conversely, if you have a child who is neglected horribly for the first year of life, and then they get some awesome adoptive parents or life changes and they have a really good life, that early period of time is still running their lives. And in very big ways. Just in those ways. Are people safe to go to when I'm in distress? Or do I need to isolate to feel better? All those basic assumptions. Do I have to produce in order to get love, to feel worthy of love? That kind of thing. So to me, pre-verbal trauma and preventing it. So those of you listening who have new babies or young children, those first years are key, to really show up and to be consistent and to do your own work during those times. Because then when shit happens later, which it will, your child can deal with it. They have what it takes, right? Now, if you suffered early neglect, my parents were good in some ways, but it was really tough in some ways. They were very stressed. One way of looking at that is they were in their parts when they were trying to raise me instead of in their self, right? So they had very strong agendas for me to do this or that or achieve or be, right? So if you have caregivers who are in their parts all the time, or even being abusive, what ends up being encoded is in body sensations and just the way you meet the world day to day, the way you meet other people day to day. And you can't remember it consciously, but it's amazing that IFS can access it because all those memories are there. But we have methods of learning to track our body sensations, learning to help clients track their body sensations. And slowly that early material begins to emerge and can be healed. So does that make sense?
Yeah. And so that includes things that could be like chronic anxiety that doesn't seem to have any kind of cause, or attachment issues, as you say, or like a profound sense of shame that people might be carrying. And so these kinds of chronic negative emotions that are impacting us, but we're not really quite sure where they're coming from. Is that accurate?
Absolutely. Yeah. And those are the things, the templates that will drive you so nuts because you can't put your finger on, why am I so anxious again? Or why am I feeling that kind of, I'm not good enough? So this is one of the things that made me so convinced that IFS was a breakthrough therapy, because what it does is we take a long time getting to know our client's protective system instead of bypassing those protectors. And we find out what their positive intentions are, and we really start to appreciate them. Then they can soften back and show us the exiles that are carrying this pre-verbal experience, and then witness it, and then they can release it. So that's what we call an unburdening. And they're quite remarkable. You can just lay down energetically those beliefs that no longer serve you, because yourself was not touched by whatever happened to you, was not touched by your trauma. It's like a force for good inside your system. I know this sounds really kind of strange when you first hear it, but so at the core, it's finding out what's going on in your life that first perhaps caused you to seek therapy or recognize that something's going on. And then a part of IFS is helping you to first recognize. It seems like that can be like one of the biggest steps for people, is just to being able to recognize what they're feeling that's impacting their day-to-day life. And then once you're able to kind of label it, then to break that down and find out, if I'm feeling this chronic anxiety, like what parts are causing this, because it can be more than one part. And then to unpack that, to try to let it go, maybe to label it, maybe to view it as like a version of yourself or some form that you can visualize or experience or have a conversation with. And then is kind of like the last part, as say, to have self-compassion. What's kind of like the end goal where you would say that somebody's kind of successfully been using IFS? What does that look like? Yeah. Well, the goal is to value your parts for the roles they've played, get to know them, have them speak. And this is where it's a little bit different from labeling them or, kind of having a map of them in your head. What's different about IFS is you actually have a direct conversation with your parts. Sometimes it's on the level of feelings and body sensations, but you have direct experience with them. And those parts, just like you did earlier, you had this interaction with your parts and they responded to you. As you go deeper with that, with your own self-energy, this force for compassion inside you, and the compassion, the self-energy of the therapist together can allow for those parts to just lay down those mistaken beliefs. There's no reason for Cody to be anxious in this situation because that situation isn't happening anymore, right? There's no reason for Colleen to go into shame when she makes a mistake because the stakes just aren't what they were when she was 3 years old or 2 years old or a year old, right? Like the people in my life now are generally pretty good, right? Nobody has the same control over me that my parents did or the same impact on me. So, it's really building relationships with these internal parts. And believe it or not, even I've worked with fetuses, parts that are in their mother's womb who picked up burdens and beliefs about themselves. For example, I was doing an IFS session of my own as the client and realized that I was like a 4-month-old in utero, and my mother was just so clear. I just knew, that part knew that my mother was overwhelmed and didn't want another baby. And that was, as a tiny little fetus, I internalized that. So those are the kinds of beliefs, and yet my mom would always want what was best for me, right? She didn't want me to internalize that. And most parents are just doing the best they can. So once that part could feel that there was no intent, then she could unburden, lay down that belief and those body sensations that went along with it.
It seems like a lot of trauma kind of comes back to attachment, like our first relationships. So maybe having like emotionally unavailable parents, right? And I'm wondering kind of how does that typically translate into parts of ourselves? Like, might you be like a people pleaser, or somebody that tries to overly protect others or something? What kinds of experiences do you see in relation in this regard?
Yeah. Well, absolutely. Becoming a people pleaser is often an early adaptation that very young kids take on when their parents are under-resourced in some way. Maybe their parents are just broke, have no money, and are each working 2 jobs. But they love their child, and but circumstances are they're so under-resourced that the child becomes a people pleaser to try to lighten the load of that their parents are carrying. But yet it's not really it doesn't come from self-compassion. It comes from the internalizing of the belief I'm a burden to my parents. Okay. In this under-resourced family, I'm another burden. I cost them money and time and attention and all of that. So very often, people-pleasing comes out of that I'm a burden belief. I'm too much trouble. I'm studying neurodiversity now and autism, and I'm learning that there is so much kind of added weight that gets added to your system when you have either highly sensitive traits or autistic traits, or you're autistic, and you have so much more sensory input coming in all the time than most people, that you can very easily start to track other people's responses to you, and it can be internalized as shame or anxiety. And I'm a super, super sensitive person, and I have certain autistic traits, and those have become like templates in my system, for having to meet other people's needs, because I can't bear people's response, either anger or shaming me, or that they're disappointed that I disappointed them in some way. So that's been an ongoing theme in my life. And I see it in my clients' lives too. Even in families that were really trying hard to nurture their children well, in a kind of a world that expects us to all act normal and kind of neurotypical, it can add a lot of pain to a lot of burdens to our parts, trying to act, trying to mask our symptoms, mask our sensitivities. So that's one of the things that's on my mind these days, and I just find there's more and more to learn about all of these differences.
Yeah, and I guess as somebody who identifies being kind of somewhere on that spectrum, I think when I was young, I would try to find ways, how can I alter my personality so that I can be friends with certain people? And it would always kind of backfire because it came across as disingenuous, right? And I kind of learned since to kind of pull back and recognize that, well, some people are going to encounter me and think I'm weird. I mean, I've literally called weird on my own podcast. It's kind of a friend that is just very direct. And so in some ways I've learned to not like embody and get embroiled in kind of what other people might say, and recognize that, I mean, the best I can do is just be my authentic self. And, that's not going to come across as it's not going to appeal to everybody, but I have to recognize, that's fine, that I am who I am. And I think I would be doing myself a disfavor if I was trying to be anybody that I'm not. And alternatively, I have this friend that is also on the spectrum, and he's kind of taken this reverse approach where he would be overbearing, and he would in some ways, instead of closing himself down, which is kind of sometimes what I would do, and I think is more common in this kind of on the spectrum traits where you just try to close yourself off from other people, is that he would end up actually inserting his opinions on others and saying kind of rude comments in a way where he was almost eliciting a reaction. And his response to me is like, well, if people don't like me, they're not going to like me. It was almost like the opposite of where he would be so overbearing in your face that he just put everybody off. And it was like a protective mechanism. And I've tried to inform him that he was doing this, and he just kind of went off on that bandwagon. And, I think he's happier than he has been, but I still see it as like a protective mechanism. And so it's like, how do you handle a situation like that? I don't know if that's a question towards you, but.
Well, I think just going back to, what you were saying about being regarded as weird, in a sort of there's a way that trying to cover that up makes it inauthentic. And then your interactions with people and your relationships feel somewhat hollow. They don't come from self. They come from parts that are protecting you from being seen as different. That was one of the things that happened to me as a kid. People thought I was really weird, and it started a real lifetime of having to mask that and to look anything but weird. And then noticing the great cost of that was that nobody got to know the real me. And so not only was it exhausting, like, again, those were managers, that was a manager-driven, protective kind of pattern, but people didn't get to see the real me. And so I didn't get to improve my self-worth over time either. It was this kind of play acting thing. So I think you're absolutely right that the more we can embrace any of these differences, maybe you've got a learning difference. There's so many ways that we can be different. We can, look different than the norm physically. There's so many ways. And the more we're able to just embrace that and drop or soften some of our protectors, the more we'll like ourselves, and the more we'll be liked in the world too.
And kind of on that note, as somebody who's kind of worked with people in IFS for a long time, I'm wondering how has being a therapist impacted your parts?
It's an interesting question.
Like, have you noticed changes in your own parts, or how you relate to yourself over the years in doing therapy with others?
Well, when I first started out as a trainee, I was doing therapy kind of through my protectors. So I was acting empathic even when I didn't feel empathic. It was kind of a performance early on. And I knew it didn't feel good, but I couldn't figure out how else to do it because I was afraid. I was afraid I was going to make a mistake. But after you get more experience, I was just talking to I mentor therapists now, and I was just talking to a new therapist. She's been working a couple years, and she's still in that place of I'm about to make a mistake all the time. So, but I have to adopt the right behavior. Instead of in IFS, you notice, okay, I've got a part here. What's it worried about? Let's ask it to soften back so I can just be the real me right now in self with this other person. But over time in my career, I became more and more authentic with clients, and my compassion became deeper and deeper and deeper. And And that has a lot to do with just having the awareness at any time that we're all really the same, ultimately. Any therapist is going to have the same kinds of issues that their clients are having, different details, but the same sorts of things. It's all being human. And it was a big advance for me learning IFS, because I began to do IFS therapy myself, which really helped me free myself from my past and become just more able to be present, to be softer, to be less agenda driven, and ultimately to be a lot less fatigued by doing therapy too, because fatigue comes from being in our protectors, right? And when our protectors are softened back, there's just not a lot of efforting that goes on.
Right. So I'd love to do kind of a quick myth-busting round with you if you're game. The idea is I'll state kind of a common myth or misconception about trauma therapy, and then you can kind of give us the truth.
I'll do my best.
So myth: people with multiple parts have multiple personality disorder.
Absolutely not. We all have multiple parts. We're all multiples. It's just the way the human psyche is made. Yeah. It's actually quite miraculous.
Oh. Myth: if I don't remember any trauma, I must not have any.
Many traumas are just put out of awareness for self-protective reasons. There are parts that make us forget traumas, and that's completely normal. And that is also healthy, because if we can't tolerate remembering a trauma, then there's a part that's going to help us by helping us forget it. They're still in there. Everything's encoded there, and we can get back to it.
Myth: trauma therapy is only about rehashing painful memories.
Absolutely not. Referring back to something we said at the beginning, there are lots of people who still do talk therapy, and talk therapy can help us work through things in our lives, talk things over. But that's not really a transformational therapy. Transformational therapy is more than going in and talking to somebody and feeling better. It's actually changing the way we hold trauma, beliefs, body sensations in our systems and freeing us from those. So find a transformational therapy rather than a talk therapy, I would say.
And that's kind of the end of the myth busting. And so kind of as we're kind of wrapping up, I'd love to ask is for somebody who's listening and they might relate to this idea parts of themselves or realize that they might have unresolved trauma. I'm wondering what are a couple of things that they might be able to do to start healing on their own and support their parts. I mean, I know seeking a therapist is always like a number one recommendation. I know that you have mindfulness and journaling. What things, it could be philosophies, methodologies, books, anything that might come to mind to help somebody?
Yeah. Well, there are tons of great podcasts that talk about internal family systems. There's IFS Talks. I would highly recommend listening to that too, because it'll give you a lot of kind of a nice understanding of internal family systems. My book is also a great introduction. We all have parts, and there are also really great books by Richard Schwartz. The one that I really like is No Bad Parts. Super accessible to anybody. It's not written in a super, academic style or anything like that. It's an easy read. So that's where I would start. Yeah.
So Colleen, you've worked with so many trauma survivors. I'm wondering, what would you say to somebody out there that's struggling in darkness but kind of afraid to confront their trauma? Any words of hope or encouragement you would want them to hear?
And no matter what's happened to you, you can get help, and you can grow and change and transform. It can be very slow work at the beginning, but what I've learned is if you can find a safe person to work with, a trustworthy person, that if you can stay with it for the long haul, that growth accelerates and that you can live a really good life, whether or not you are still carrying burdens. So it's really worth the journey. I think we're all on a journey. I think our souls are on journeys. And I think that being on earth at this time is a very hard school. And so we're here to learn. And I think that, gather people around you that can help you do that. Don't keep re-traumatizing yourself. Go where it's warm. I like to think about that. Go where it's warm.
Well, Colleen, this was a fantastic conversation. I can't tell you how much I appreciate kind of you breaking all of this down for us today. And I think what really hits me is that we shouldn't think of these parts as enemies that we need to defeat, but they're there actually trying to help us, even when it feels like they're being a total pain in the ass. So
100%
if you're listening and you found yourself thinking, wait, that sounds like me, during kind of any part of our conversation, do yourself a favor and grab Colleen's book, We All Have Parts. It's not your typical dense therapy book. It's got these like really great illustrations that I love, that I was looking at for minutes, 5 minutes, just like on each page. I love that you provide like a roadmap of when, if you're kind of lost in the woods. Because I think healing, it's not about becoming this perfect version of ourselves, but it's about like showing up, right? And connecting with ourselves first and then with others. So I think just get curious about that, that voice in your head that's always criticizing you, or that part that just wants to hide from the world. I think there's something incredible in all of us. And if we can just find this compassionate self that's not broken and really never was. So if you found value in today's episode, I'd be incredibly grateful if you'd share it with someone who might need to hear it. And if you haven't already, please hit the subscribe so you never miss an episode, or leave us a rating or review. It really helps. So all the links to Colleen's work are in the show notes. And until next time, this is Cody McLean. Hey, stay curious about what's happening in that wild, amazing head of yours.